Yesterday, President Trump signed a groundbreaking executive order titled Strengthening American Leadership in Digital Financial Technology. And while it doesn't impose any immediate legally binding rules, it represents a pivotal moment for Bitcoin policy in the United States. So I'll break down what you need to know, what it means for the future of Bitcoin in the US. First, I want to start with one fact. This EO does not ban central bank digital currencies, protect self-custody or mining, provide regulatory clarity, or create a Bitcoin stockpile outright. Instead, what it has done is it has formed a working group tasked with reviewing these issues and submitting recommendations to the president within 180 days. This is an aspirational roadmap, not a legally binding framework. That said, this order does make several critical moves that set the stage for a more Bitcoin-friendly policy environment should the working group determine that this is the route to go. The first thing that they're tasked to consider is whether or not self-custody and public blockchain access will be explicitly protected. If this goes through, it would mean that Americans' right to self-custody Bitcoin and participate in open, permissionless blockchain networks, like Bitcoin, is now enshrined in law. The second thing they're reviewing is whether or not to prohibit CBDCs. So the order, if it goes through, would ban any action by federal agencies to develop or promote central bank digital currencies, safeguarding individual privacy and financial sovereignty. And the third, perhaps most pivotal of all, is that a groundwork for a Bitcoin reserve is being laid. The working group is going to evaluate the creation of a national digital asset stockpile, and in the words of the EO, potentially derived from cryptocurrencies already held in federal custody. Now, of course, I'll talk about exactly what is in the custody of the US government in just a moment, so don't get upset that Bitcoin was not mentioned in the EO itself, because it's basically the only thing that the government holds. But apart from this executive order, the most substantial thing that happened yesterday actually had nothing to do with the EO itself, but had to do with what happened afterward at the SEC. And that was creating SAB 122, which repealed SAB 121, which were the restrictions that prevented banks from directly holding Bitcoin or building financial products with it. That's totally gone. So this repeal now enables banks to use Bitcoin as pristine collateral, which cements its role as the base layer of global financial markets, and developed Bitcoin-backed lending, settlement, investment products, and other things at scale. So this repeal is a massive leap forward in the financialization of Bitcoin. Arguably the largest leap that Bitcoin has taken since the block size wars, finally allowing its monetary properties, absolute scarcity and immutability, to shine in traditional finance, and finally serve as pristine collateral, which its monetary properties have always enabled it to. So this brings us to a critical point, the US government's crypto holdings. But the reality is they're overwhelmingly in Bitcoin. Of the $20.46 billion in assets seized and held by the US, Bitcoin accounts for an astonishing 97.73% of the total value. That's 198,109 Bitcoin, worth approximately $20 billion. So for comparison, the second largest holding is Ethereum with only $176 million falling by the day, followed by USDT at $122 million. The gap is enormous, and Bitcoin is already the dominant digital asset in US custody, making it the natural foundation for any future national reserve. This is, in effect, a proto-reserve. The first step is holding what you already have, and the next step is building your position in the best performing, most worthwhile asset in that reserve. And the only asset that fits that description is Bitcoin. Now, here's where things get more nuanced and arguably more frustrating for people like myself. Trump's executive order uses the broad term digital assets instead of differentiating Bitcoin from the rest of the so-called crypto industry. The shift comes after Ripple and its founder, Chris Larsen, continue to pour millions of dollars into both the Trump campaign and now the Trump administration. They're trying to undermine what will ultimately be a Bitcoin reserve. So it's no coincidence that this order lumps Bitcoin in with tokens and projects that lack Bitcoin's distinct qualities. So while this bundling is frustrating for Bitcoin advocates, it's important to recognize that this is a step in the right direction, because ultimately this working group's 180-day review will inevitably lead them to one conclusion. That's that Bitcoin is the only digital asset worth holding in a national reserve because it's the only asset there. So the first reason is Bitcoin's performance, right? It is the best performing asset of the last decade. Its track record speaks for itself. Number two, its transaction history is permanently recorded in the blockchain, ensuring trust and transparency. It's totally immutable. And the third is Bitcoin's monetary policy. It has an absolutely fixed supply of 21 million Bitcoin, which offers absolute scarcity, unlike any other asset in this space. So as noted, Bitcoin accounts for nearly 98% of the government's holdings, so any formalization of a national digital asset reserve would naturally be Bitcoin-centric, simply because no other asset comes close, and ultimately entirely Bitcoin. So just as the broader market rejected non-Bitcoin ETFs, like the Ethereum launch, favoring Bitcoin-only products, so too will the US government in time recognize that Bitcoin is the only asset worth building upon. So here's the timeline. The working group has 180 days to evaluate these policies and propose recommendations to the president, which means every country on earth has just 6 months to front-run the United States before this roadmap turns into action. So the question isn't whether Bitcoin will play a role, it's how soon. So while this executive order isn't perfect, right, bundling Bitcoin with inferior assets and stopping short of delivering immediate regulatory clarity, it does open the floodgates for much further future progress. By protecting self-custody, potentially repealing SAB 121, which is already done, potentially banning CBDCs, and beginning the conversation about a Bitcoin reserve, this order sets the stage for a transformational shift. And let's not forget the groundwork is being laid for Senator Lummis's Bitcoin Act of 2024, which could cement Bitcoin as the backbone of what will ultimately be a strategic Bitcoin reserve. The bottom line is that this is not a final victory, but it's not a defeat. In fact, it is a major step forward. So that's all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. If you found this video helpful, make sure to leave a like and reshare this with your friends and family members so that they understand exactly what's going on. And of course, check out Theia, the world's simplest Bitcoin self-custody solution at theia.us. That's all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.